evening, everyone. I was a late call-up this evening because unfortunately Barry called me at about 2 o'clock this afternoon, and I saw his call coming in and I was like, okay. And the reason why I was reluctant and the reason I actually didn't put my name on the lineup at the beginning was because if we're talking about the masculine and the feminine, we've got to be talking about the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And if we're talking about the divine masculine and the divine feminine, well, we've kind of got to address the shadow as well. And I knew I'd have to say that for a large part of my life, I lived in this place of the shadow masculine or the wounded masculine. You know, I was promiscuous. I was unfaithful. I partook in locker room talk. I laughed at sexist jokes. I don't know if there are any men who didn't, because for a large part of our lives, for a large part of our upbringing, this was what society taught us. I mean, go back and watch some of the old James Bond films. You know, James Bond walking into Q's office, slapping Moneypenny on the butt and winking at her. I mean, if that was in a movie today, what would the outrage be? But yet, this is what we were taught as children. Not to mention the other aspect that our parents brought us up in a particular way. Our parents passed on their wounding to us. And as I got through my 20s and into my early 30s, and I was living a sort of like a dual life. I was studying all the spiritual material, reading all these books, going to talks, going to workshops. But I had 3 or 4 girlfriends on the go at one time. This is how it was. I had broken up with a long-term relationship. I moved in with some friends, and I was like, okay, listen, things aren't, I'm not ready to settle down. I was living in London. I was drinking a lot. And there were a lot of girls available. And that is just how it was. And at the time, I didn't realize what it was. I was kind of swinging between codependency and a deep fear of intimacy that prevented me from building any deep, lasting, meaningful relationships. And eventually, I reached a stage where it became quite uncomfortable. I started to notice that the relationships were empty and meaningless, and I would rather spend my Friday night alone than go and have a meaningless relationship. And I reached this point where I decided to stop dating completely. I was going to go on a self-enforced sabbatical until I met the one. And so I had a couple of uncomfortable conversations, and I'd called quits. And I wasn't going to date at all until I met the one, somebody meaningful. And this was a point of awareness, a point of realization that I didn't have before. You're kind of like stuck in this place where you're just living your life and you're moving and you can't see the wood for the trees. And then the discomfort made things clear. I needed to change something. And after making that decision and realizing that I had to sort things out, it was only, and I was now ready to be single for like months and years. A couple of weeks later, I met my wife. And I was like, no, this can't be. But it was just like so synchronous, the way that everything fell together. And we landed up in a bookshop and we sort of like exchanged a few words. And then I showed her a book and then she said, let's go for a beer. And I was like, okay, maybe this is the one now. And it's like fallen into place. But the discussion on the masculine energy and the feminine energy isn't just about relationships. And it's not just about sex. It's about so much more, and I'm so glad that the other speakers have discussed that tonight. But I want to go back to my early years in London, and I'd started reading some interesting stuff And one of the authors that I read was a lady by the name of Gangaji. And I'm not sure if any of you guys have heard about her, and she's married to this guy called Eli Jackson Bear. And I really loved her book. And they came to London, and I went to go to one of their talks. And it was basically like a meditation followed by some questions. And I thought, great, I want to go and see these people. And we sit there and we have this great meditation. And there's some questions. And then towards the end of the questions, this young Aussie guy, and I say young because I was probably about 26 at the time and he was probably about 20. And it's not often that you come across an Aussie in London who's a bit lost for words and struggling to express himself. So he starts asking this question, and he's got a mouthful of teeth, and he's like, okay, I'm sort of like feeling like a lot of love, and I'm feeling like this intense energy, and he's stumbling over his words, and eventually, like, through the questioning, he says he's got so much love coming through him, but sometimes when he's with a woman, it feels that the energy is like getting a bit lower in his body. And then eventually he spits it out and he says, I've got like a lot of spiritual energy when I'm meditating, but when there's women around, I'm getting horny. And obviously everybody chuckles nervously because we're in the sacred space, and there are these like very spiritual teachers sitting there, and everybody's sort of like giggling, but everybody's glad that somebody else has asked this question. And Eli Jackson Bay, in his wisdom, he simply said, allow that energy to flow, but you don't need the plumbing. And I've sat with that line for a long time, because obviously, you know, this is something that I've experienced, and it's something that I've had to work through. And I've thought about that line for many years. And what I've come to realize is, while it's great, there's a little bit more to it. And as I started my journey of becoming an energy healer, I realized that the energy is all about the plumbing. It's about understanding the plumbing, making sure there are no leaks, making sure the water or the energy flows in the right direction. You know, it's also about checking the wiring, making sure your house doesn't have any leaks, making sure your windows close, but it's also about the plumbing. And when it comes to the masculine and the feminine energy, they run through channels through your body. Now, you've got your Sushumna channel, which runs up your spine, and alongside that, you've got your Ida and your Pingala channels that crisscross, and where they cross, you have your chakras. And these channels carry chi, but in the same place, you also have your masculine and feminine energy running. And what happens is, when you have particular wounds or blockages in your youth, in these ages, you can create blockages in these energy channels. So let's say, for example, my mother at a particular age either does something that perhaps I lose respect for her, it will create a blockage in the feminine channel. But let's say my mother's a bit domineering and she steps on my masculinity, I'd have a blockage in my masculine channel. And what happens through our lifetimes as we go through these traumatic experiences, we land up with all these blockages in our energy channels. And not only in the masculine and feminine energy channels, but in all our chakras, in all our meridians. And, you know, we can have blockages anywhere in the energy channel, in the energy body, depending on what's going on. And so you've got to start working on clearing these energy channels, and there's various meditations and exercises that you can do. And obviously, working on your own healing journey, which is of utmost importance. And so, with this as the background, I became an energy healer, and I left the business world, and after some time, I had a client who was referred to me. And the client was referred by another practitioner of tantric massage, and this client was referred with a condition of sexual addiction. And he was a recovering addict, so he was recovering from alcoholism and drug addiction, and he was now struggling with sex addiction. And as part of the sex addiction, he was finding himself attracted to watching pornography and feeling like urges so strong that he couldn't stop watching pornography. And he was also then hiring prostitutes. Several times a week, he was finding himself so drawn and so committed and feeling the energy so strongly that he almost couldn't resist the urge to hire prostitutes. And he wanted it to stop because he didn't like the way it made him feel. Now, substance abuse, like many things, causes a lot of damage to the energy body. It creates a lot of holes in the aura. It increases the permeability or the porousness of the energy field. And so the energy field becomes weak, and it can attract negative energy from the world around you. And so he had a lot of negative energy in his aura from the world around him. And the first thing that we had to do is we had to clear this negative energy out, because the negative energy had a very low frequency, and the low frequency was affecting the plumbing. And we'll come back to that in a second. The other thing is, I don't want to pretend to know the answer to addiction, but there was a lot of childhood trauma which had caused what's called soul loss, so part of the soul shutting down or closing down, and that was another part of the process. But before we even got to dealing with the soul loss and doing the soul retrieval, simply clearing the energy field of the negative energy with his awareness that he didn't like the behavior that he was displaying, the pornography and the use of prostitutes, the sexual addiction simply went away. It was just like no real big effort. It was there 1 week, and a few weeks later, he just didn't have that urge to watch pornography any further. And the other thing we did is an exercise with the plumbing. Now, this is quite interesting, and we're probably going to have some more giggles now, because some time ago I had a client refer to me, and the client had what is called persistent genital arousal syndrome. In other words, too much energy in the genitals, and she couldn't stop having orgasms. And normally when I tell people this story, there are a few little giggles and chuckles around the audience, and there's normally comments like, well, that doesn't sound like so much of a problem. But let me give you an idea. Let me give you an idea of how much of a problem that it was. Now, she came to see me about 2 weeks after the problem started. And in the first 10 minutes that she was in my healing room, she had 4 orgasms. Okay. And she was crying because she couldn't stop it. And I'm not just talking about a little orgasm. Have any of you guys seen When Harry Met Sally? Okay, so you've got the idea. So initially, long story short, we had to get the energy moving away from the genitals and up. And what I discovered was, when I tuned into the Kundalini energy, which everybody was telling me, no, it's the Kundalini energy, she's having a Kundalini awakening. It wasn't the Kundalini energy. And I connected to the Kundalini energy, and the neighbors knew about it. So, yeah. So then, what my intuition is telling me is that it's not the Kundalini energy. It's actually what some people call the sacred sexual energy, but what I prefer to call the sacred creative energy. And there's a reservoir of energy which is down near the genitals, and what had happened is this energy was flowing the wrong way. And so what we did is we brought this energy up to a heart center, and then we distributed it to the body. And that worked. And the orgasm stopped. And we kept doing that, and we gave her some exercises. And within a short space of time, she was healed of this problem. And what that tells me is something very, very interesting. Because it means that this energy that we have in our genitals, we can actually work with it. And what I've since discovered is it's typically got a frequency, like all energy. All energy has a frequency. And this energy can be manipulated through our intention. So what we did is we raised the frequency of that energy, and then we moved it with intention up to the heart center, and then we distributed it through the body. And you can do this exercise very simply. If you find your sexual energy is of a low frequency and too concentrated near the base, you can raise the frequency with your intention and bring it up, just focusing on your breath, and out through the body. Now, this is a problem that so many people on the spiritual journey battle with. And it's a problem that I would say 99% of all men battle with. And so as I applied this practice to myself, because I like to practice all the techniques that I work on, I found it very effective. And just jumping back, years ago, still in London, after I met my wife, we went to this meditation course at the Theosophical Society in London. And after a few weeks, there's this older guy. I say older, maybe he was in his 50s. And he was teaching this meditation course. And after a few weeks, we did this exercise of breathing energy up the spine, through the chakra channel. And that was the exercise. We'd breathe it up and we'd breathe it down. We'd breathe it up to the third eye and breathe it down. And something that guy said to me struck me as very interesting. Because he said that this exercise was quite useful when feeling the energy down in the genitals. And he was a very prim and proper Englishman who didn't really laugh too much and, very stiff upper lip type of guy. But he said that a lot of spiritual people struggle with or suffer from heightened sexual arousal. I think those were his words. And, I've always just considered what he said. But it is an obstacle on the spiritual path. Because in A Course in Miracles, it tells us that part of the Course in Miracles that was edited out of the published version. There's a line that says, all these impulses are miracle impulses, but what the ego does is it directs it in the wrong direction. I can't remember the exact lines, but basically, we've got this impulse, we've got this urge within us to connect with another person. So we feel this connection to another person, but what's happening is our subconscious ego is like saying, well, you connect sexually. Because you can't connect energetically because you're in a physical body. And it's one of the biggest decoys of the ego. One of the biggest decoys of being in a physical body is we believe that in order to connect with another person, we've got to do it physically. But if you didn't have a physical body, how would you connect to another person? If you ascended, if you reached spiritual enlightenment and you ascended to the higher planes and you met somebody, how would you connect? You'd simply feel their energy. And you can do that without the physical body. And you can have this amazing energetic connection. So, this was the other exercise I gave to the sex addict. Breathe the energy up to the heart, distribute it through the body, raise the frequency of that energy, distribute it through the body. And it is very, very effective. So, as a society, as we move through these great changes that we're experiencing. As James Bond is no longer allowed to touch the secretary's bottom when he walks into the office, and as all of us raise our consciousness, we've all got to do the work to keep up. You know, when I was young, kids could sit in the back of a car without a seatbelt on and you could jump around and carry on like a monkey. Your parents could be smoking in the car while they were driving you. You know, and James Bond could go and slap Moneypenny's bottom. But that's not acceptable anymore because society has shifted. And as society shifts, we kind of relate to it in a couple of ways. Part of our own awakening is affecting society, as is the collective consciousness affecting us. And so the call for all of us is to do the work. Because the work that we do, the wisdom that we attain, the moments of awakening that we experience affect all of society. And if we want society to heal, we need to heal ourselves. My housekeeper still doesn't look at me in the eye because she was there that day that person came. And every time my housekeeper arrives and I say hi, she sort of does this. But that's okay, because the wisdom and the learning that I experienced from that particular healing session and the sessions that followed was so profound, and I really think that it's important that more people know about this, that it's not that difficult, and that we can do it, and that we can make an impact on society. Thank you.